And so I was an acrobat in the circus summers. We would tour summers from 9 to 14. And my mom had just a cassette of Born in the USA. And when we would do these long drives in between, we were a circus. We didn't have any cool, we didn't fly anywhere. It was all just driving from town to town. And we would drive all across the country, and I would sleep in the back seat with my little headphones on, and in the Walkman, that was one of the cassettes that I would listen to on repeat over and over again, was Born in the USA.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to a new episode of Set Listing Bruce, your podcast all about Bruce Springsteen, his music, and mostly his fans. I am your host, Jesse Jackson. Joining me tonight is a comedian, a fellow podcaster, and a big Bruce Springsteen fan, Trevor Rogers. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, boy, I'm telling you what, for those of you, this is an audio podcast only, but Trevor has a great setup. He looks like he knows what he's doing, so I'm a little intimidated doing this podcast. So tell us a little about yourself.
Well, it's funny. What you're seeing mostly is actually from music. So I've been into music all my life and making music as well. The guy that I do a podcast with right now, who's the co-host, was the singer in my bands for years.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so music has always been a huge part of my life. And Bruce Springsteen has, been since I was a kid, just a constant part of my life and my creative process.
Mm-hmm. Now, you're in California, correct?
I am. I'm born and raised in,
Okay.
yeah.
What part of California?
So right now I'm in Santa Cruz, California. I grew up
Okay.
in San Francisco.
Okay, very nice. One of the great cities in the world, San Francisco.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. It's
We go ahead.
Yeah, it's I don't know if I would move back, honestly, but I do love to visit. It's one of those places where like I don't think I'd live there again, but I really enjoy when I get to go back and see friends.
Well, that's the same thing. I would not want to live in New Orleans, but I
Hmm.
love visiting it. I say this with love in my heart. Linda is my wife, and when we went to San Francisco the first time, she's like, it's like a clean New Orleans. It's just like there's not quite the smell that New Orleans, because it's so, you know, close to the Mississippi River and all the humidity. She's like, but there's all this culture and this great food and this melting of different, neighborhoods. So yeah, it's one of our favorite cities to visit. I agree with you. I probably would not want to live there, but yeah.
And most of
So
us couldn't afford to live there now, so
absolutely, that is the truth there too. Um, so let's. I always like to start at the beginning. So first off, how are you guys coping with this, with COVID and everything? How are you doing in the pandemic?
well, it's been a crazy time. I mean, I know it's that way for everyone. Our situation is certainly not unique. But we got through the full first year of the pandemic and went back to work, got vaccinated, and we were talking off audio here, but off recording. But my fiance did actually just come down with COVID, or at least she was just tested positive, and so I'm waiting for my test to come back. And so right now it's a little nerve wracking, but I feel fine. So, I'm fully vaccinated. I think if there is a breakthrough case here, hopefully it will be mild. But yeah, it's been a wild time, I know, for everyone. And we've been really lucky that we got through unscathed. And, now it's just knock on wood, but I feel fine.
Oh, that's good. That is great. And you know, I've been back at work. We went back last May of 2020, and so been at the office, except for, like, I had a couple of months where I was off for medical reasons, but we've been back. But we had gotten where we were no masks, everything was fine. And all of a sudden, starting on Monday, we're back wearing masks. We're back to when we order food, I run a contact center, and so we're really busy. We do roadside assistance, so this is the busy time. So we'll often bring in food, and we're back to bringing individual boxes. Like, you don't
Yeah.
bring in pizza and everyone shares. It's like, here's your little self-contained box. Here's your self-contained box, because we're trying to get a handle on this, and it's just crazy.
Yeah, it's I guess kind of nostalgia for us in a both negative and positive way, because it does feel like we're back to quarantine right now. We are
Yeah,
literally back to quarantine. She and I have to be quarantined for 10 days. So it feels like, oh, I remember this. I remember when we
yeah,
didn't leave the
exactly.
house and a lot of
Yeah,
Netflix. And we're
yeah.
just having popcorn. Luckily, we had done a big Costco run right before this happened, so we're
uh,
actually just pretty well set up. But yeah, it
yeah.
feels very strange. It feels like we're stepping backwards.
I did we did a lot of binging, and I really did a lot of podcasting,
Mm-hmm.
because um I was working from home, so it was a little bit easier to say, hey, I can take my lunch break anytime I want. So hey, if you can talk at 10 a.m. on a Tuesday, let's record it. Let's knock an episode out. So yeah, it is. So it is. Um, yeah, I am hoping that we do not have to get locked down again. Texas is like Florida, and I promise listeners we're going to get off this, but it was chilling to hear the Dallas County. The head of our county is a judge. Just historically that's what he's called, and he had an announcement on Monday that says, we are in such bad shape. If you have a child that needs an ICU bed, the only way you're going to get one is a child
Dies.
dies.
I saw that. It's
And you're
terrible.
like, what? So yeah, just horrible. So hopefully we can get people vaccinated, we can get people doing the right things, and we can get past this, because I'm ready to have an E Street Band tour.
Right?
Exactly,
Yeah.
right. All right, Trevor, let's start at the beginning. You said you
Sure.
grew up in California. Talk to me about growing up. What kind of music did your family listen to? What kind of music was in the household?
So my parents were super hippies when I was young, and so there was a lot of Fleetwood Mac and all the kind of classic hippie stuff. Definitely, they were children of the '60s and kind of the Cultural Revolution. And what was funny though was they didn't have there was no like Born to Run in the house. We didn't have any of the original Springsteen albums. It really started for us with Born in the USA, and it's I have a strange childhood. Actually, I grew up partly in a circus. So there was a circus called the Pickle Family Circus, which was a San Francisco-based circus. They didn't have animals; it was very small, but it was basically a traveling group of performers who did a lot of circus stuff. And my mom was the box office manager for them for years. And from age 9 to 14, I took a bunch of gymnastics. I wanted to be in the show, so I took a bunch of gymnastics. And at age 9, I was put in the show, and so I was an acrobat in the circus summers. We would tour summers from 9 to 14, and my mom had a cassette of Born in the USA, and when we would do these long drives in between, we were a circus. We didn't have any cool, we didn't fly anywhere. It was all just driving from town to town, and we would drive all across the country. And I would sleep in the back seat with my little headphones on, and in the Walkman, that was one of the cassettes that I would listen to on repeat over and over again was Born in the USA, and so it kind of was I think in some ways at that point it was just a default. I didn't really have any connection to the music. I was a 10-year-old kid. I didn't understand overarching themes of
Sure.
it wasn't meaningful to me in any way, but I enjoyed it. I just liked the melodies. I liked the driving, force of it,
Yeah.
especially while we were driving. It was a nice way to kind
Sure.
of just, I remember sleeping in the back, or at least laying down in the back seat, and kind of the rhythms and the rhythm of the driving in the car and the engine. And it had this very nostalgic pull for me from that young age. And then I kind of lost Bruce for
Okay.
many years, and in high school was really gravitated towards. I got very angsty, and it was all I was heavy metal. I had like listened to Slayer and Megadeth and Metallica, and that was I had long hair, and I had like a one earring which I thought was cool, and in retrospect was not remotely cool. And I sort of I moved away from all of the music that I had listened to when I was younger. Uh, and then at some point in high school, I think it was either sophomore or junior year, someone played, or it came on the radio, or I heard "Cover Me" uh, from Born in the USA, and I just remember thinking, "Wow, this song is like metal. Like the guitar is amazing. That first opening guitar riff is
Yeah.
just the little lead part, and then it's just this driving song. And what's interesting is I know he wrote that for Donna Summer. It was supposed to be a Donna Summer song,
Right.
but it was just this. It was so like I was like, wow, this is kind of heavy. Like this is pretty badass, and that sort of
Yeah.
like opened the window for me to be like, okay, well maybe I can listen to something other than just this hardcore metal, because this is still pretty cool. Like this is still pretty rocking. And then I bought Born in the USA again. I went out and got it, and that was it. I mean, after that, I was down the rabbit hole with Bruce, and it really kind of opened me up to getting out of sort of the not that there's anything wrong with heavy metal music. I still, if I'm in the gym, I'll still listen to some Metallica or something. But it really, that kind of pried the door open for me to get back into sort of listening to other music and really going into a deep dive on Bruce.
So I want to go back just for a moment. You grew up in a circus.
Yes.
That is awesome. Uh,
Yeah.
yeah, I have a nephew that for a while uh, dated a acrobat that was in a traveling circus,
Oh wow.
and it was really funny because um, I have two nephews and two nieces. They're all from my wife's brother's family, and um, at the time, the oldest was dating someone that was in the circus. Um, the younger daughter was living in a commune in North Carolina,
That
like
tracks.
this growing your own food and all this, doing, hand making furniture. And the youngest son was walking the Appalachian Trail.
Oh wow.
And the older daughter was like, yeah, I'm the weirdo. I went to law school and I'm now working at a law firm. She's like, I am the odd person out of my
the
family.
the black sheep is the normal one. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. What when you did acrobatics, what were you doing?
So yeah, it was just floor tumbling.
Okay.
I did juggle. I'm still a pretty good juggler. But I actually didn't juggle in the show. My mom did. She was the
Hmm.
box office manager. But then
Okay.
everyone, as kind of the years would progress with the circus, they really wanted everyone who was involved to actually be in the show, to take part in some way.
That
And
makes
so
sense.
yeah, and especially because it was so small, and
Yeah.
it didn't make sense to have anyone along who wasn't actually going to be performing. And so we all helped set up the tent and the bleachers and everything, and then we all broke it down. And my mom would come from, she was the box office manager, so she would be in the, she would sell the tickets and take the tickets, and then she was responsible for payroll and handing out money. And then when she was at the very end, they had this thing called the Big Juggle, and my mom would run from the ticket booth all the way in and jump on a big globe, this big ball, and she would balance on the ball, and they would do this big juggling act at the end. So we were all involved, and mine was just floor tumbling. So I would wear, these kind of stretchy outfits and
Sure.
run, and I would just go back and forth, running across and doing, back handspring, back
Okay.
flips. It was just like you would see in the Olympics, but less.
No,
I'm no Simone Biles. It was
no.
all.
Uh, so two things, and it's one of those things, just laziness on my part. I've always wanted to learn how to juggle and play the guitar, and I just, I'm now 62, and I realize just take the time to do it, but there's other things
Yeah,
to do. So, yeah.
it's never
So
too late.
exactly, and so you weren't quite Dick Grayson,
No.
from Robin, the flying trapeze, but
Yeah.
that's got to be, how when you go to corporate events, they'll often say, okay, as an icebreaker, give two truths and a lie,
Hmm.
right? And so you have a great one.
That has
Grew up
served
in
me well.
grew up in a
Yeah.
circus. Oh, that's got to be the lie,
Yep.
So yeah. Um, all right, so you're in high school and you hear Cover Me, and like Paul on the road to Damascus, you went, oh wait, that's right. I remember this music. So talk to me a little bit about rediscovering Bruce, and what about him spoke to you?
I think a lot, partly it was the nostalgia. I mean, there was
Sure.
this, like I said, it kind of pried open the door, and then I sort of felt like with manhood, I was like, okay, well, I can listen to this music because it does, Bruce rocks. I mean, Bruce, that voice, just the raspiness, and I was like, this is more metal than the metal I'm listening to. Like, this is real angst here.
Yeah.
And so it kind of, it gave me that sort of in. But a lot of it, I think, initially was nostalgia. A lot of it was just kind of reawakening, like, oh, I remember being 9, 10 years old and listening to this album over and over again. And so it was all so familiar to me. And so, that was the start. And then I bought Greatest Hits, which, there were songs on there because I just wasn't familiar with anything before that album. Uh, and so, getting to sort of listen to some of the, sort of dabble a little bit without, I didn't buy any of the old albums right away. I just bought Greatest Hits. And then I remember, I think for me, a big part of it, like I said, there was sort of this manliness to Bruce. There was this real angst and this kind of, obviously all of the car imagery and all of the kind of young man, unrequited love stuff. It was just all very appropriate for a teenage guy, but at the same time, it sort of allowed me to tap into a more emotional element because the heavy metal music that I was listening to just didn't have that side to it. And I did have that part of me that was sort of, I think, a little bit buried. And it gave me the ability in a lot of ways to tap into a more nuanced and sort of tender part of myself as a teenager. As a
Right.
teenager, really struggling and trying to be so badass and
Mhm.
cool, it gave me this ability to say, okay, you can be Bruce Springsteen, you can be the baddest guy on the planet, and still, I remember listening to Downbound Train, and
Yeah.
that the part where it's almost a cappella, where the drums cut out and everything, and it's just him and
Yeah.
and the keyboard, and he ends the with I've dropped to my knees, hang my head, and cry. And, I remember getting teared up as a teenager and like actually starting to, tap into some emotion that I had been repressing for a long time and feeling like it was okay to be both the badass teenage angsty kid that I was, and also like starting to feel other things, starting to have kind of, some real depth of emotion breakthrough. And that was what appealed to me about Springsteen was he had all of that. He had the teenage angst, he had the cars and the girls, but there was also so much depth there. There was just this well of real emotion and real sort of it was just more profound than anything that I was dealing with at the time.
So about time wise, what year is this?
So this would have been around 95, 90,
Okay.
yeah, 94, 95. I think Greatest Hits came out right around then.
Yeah, I think so too. I just had a couple of guys on the podcast. I haven't released the episode yet, but we were talking about that um sometimes certain Springsteen fans give Born in the USA short shift, right?
Oh, I
Like,
know. Yeah, I
yeah,
know. It's
like,
almost embarrassing to say that that
yeah,
was my,
like, yeah.
connection.
But the truth is, it was the gateway drug
Hmm.
to many people. That's how they found Bruce. And there is nothing wrong with being a casual fan, and that, that's all of Bruce. But many of us, that, once you got that album, then you went to go find other things, like you did in Greatest Hits, or then later went to other albums. And the reality is, you know Born in the USA is a damn fine album. you
I
know
still think it's a great album. I mean,
yeah.
obviously, since then I did then go back and buy Born to
Yeah.
Run, and I even Nebraska and all the, you know, I have actually Tracks is one of my one of the albums that I really love, is sort of all
Yeah.
his throwaway songs for
Yeah.
him. But Tracks I think is great. I listened to it all through college,
Yes.
and even silly songs like the Lion's Den, and just all these songs that kind of they were fun and they connected with me, even though they never were actually hits that he put out.
Yeah,
Um,
Lion's Den is on my list of songs that I would be chasing live.
yeah,
That, because I love that song.
yeah, part man,
Yeah.
part monkey. Even there's
Yeah.
ridiculous songs that did, like, and even
Yeah.
and then just even like hearing the old, growing up, the first
Yeah.
his first takes at it. So yeah, I mean, obviously, it's funny to kind of. I think that it does still get short shrift. I think that people sort of look at that as, from a purist aspect, we all have that. There's there are the albums that are appeal to the casual fans, and then there's the
Yeah.
albums that we all love. But for me, again, that was my window into Bruce, and that was kind of
Yeah.
how that was what opened the door. And I think that's great. Every band, every major famous band has that one hit that brings everyone in, and some people are only going to focus on that one hit or that one album, and
Yeah.
that's gonna be their only touchstone for that band.
Right.
And some people are then going to that's gonna open the door, and that's what it did for me, is it just opened the door.
You know, um, I think back that, um, you know, it was, I saw on Quorum, the website, where people post questions and people answered, and someone said, why did Bruce Springsteen not duplicate the success of Born in the USA? And my answer was, well, if you look at his career, he very seldom repeats himself. The albums, the the River, it was different than, Darkness, and then, Nebraska, and Born in the USA, and Tunnel of Love, and on and on. So it it is, interesting that when you go to see him live, I think of my buddy Sam, who, years ago, went to a Tom Petty concert, and I said, "Oh, how was it?" He said, "All I could think was, this would be the concert that a Tom Petty fan would hate." He said, because he played all the songs I wanted to hear, all the
Yeah.
hits, and I was a blast. And I think, if I was a diehard Tom Petty fan, I'm probably rolling my eyes going, why is he doing, this over and over again? And, um, it's hilarious that, Bruce has such a diverse catalog that he doesn't do every song off Born in the USA, mixing in the mix. He just, he picks just a few from there. It is
Yeah.
just kind of funny.
It is, and I respect that, and I appreciate, though, that he does still bring out. He's still. I think he's
Yeah.
done Dancing in the Dark at every concert I've
Right.
been to, at least
Right.
all the ones I've seen. That he still does, and he will. I also like that when he does bring back certain songs, especially the real kind of arena rockers.
Yeah.
He often reconfigures them. It's a
Yeah.
different arrangement, and
Yeah.
that has always. I've really enjoyed that as well with the live shows, that sometimes, oh, it's a song that I've been waiting to hear forever, but but why would he just do it the way that he did it then? It was so big, and he did it so many times back then, that
Hmm.
you can see that for him, he needs to make it fresh. He needs to do something with it to sort
Yeah.
of justify bringing it back into the set list. And that's something I've respected. It's funny you should mention that, though, about the Tom Petty concert, because I had the experience with I was a not a Grateful Dead fan. But
Okay.
there were like a couple songs I really liked. There was an album, I think, In the Dark, which had like their sort of hits, right? Like Touch of Grey
Okay.
and a
Yeah.
couple others. And those were the only songs I knew. And my friend kind of dragged me to a Grateful Dead concert, and that was the opposite experience, where it was a great. I'm sure if you're a Grateful Dead fan, that was an awesome concert. And for me, they didn't play anything I'd ever heard of. It was just meandering forever. Everyone was loving it, and I was like, I don't even. Why am I here? Like, I don't want it. So I want the artist to at least bring in a few of those top
Yes.
songs, but also you got to throw some stuff to the big fans too.
When I a couple of years ago, longer than that now probably, but my wife and I, it was the holiday season, and they were doing at the Meyerson, Handel's Messiah, the choruses. Okay.
Oh yeah,
And so, and had a great time. And but I said I do feel like I went to I went to a concert where I knew two hits,
yeah.
right? Like I knew the Hallelujah chorus, and I know for Unto Us a Son is Born. That's the only two songs
Mhm.
I knew. And so, like I'm enjoying the other songs, but I'm like, oh, there's the hit.
Mhm.
And then, so right. Uh, it, and yeah, it is funny too, like when you think about Atlantic City has become an E Street song, even though
Yeah.
it was on Nebraska. He's figured out how the band to do it totally.
And I love both those versions. Like
Yes.
I love that original stripped down Atlantic City
Yeah.
that I think he recorded it in like a hotel, part of it in like a hotel room
Yeah.
bathroom. He was getting like those
Right.
great echoes. And that song is so haunting, it's
Yeah.
just there. That is one of my favorite Springsteen songs. And now I've seen it live with the, bandified, right? With the
Yeah.
entire band, just the way it just rocks now. And I love it both ways. And I'm so glad that he's not so precious about his songs that he's not willing to completely rework them if he feels like he can add something to it, and that's great to see.
Yeah. I've told this story before on the podcast, so listeners skip ahead if you don't want to hear it repeat. But we were in New Orleans a couple of years ago, and we were at the Spotted Calf, and this live music. It was like it was on an afternoon, and they were explaining that he says, just pretend we're in a living room. Like we don't, this is, we don't really have a set. We don't normally play together. We're just kind of we do this just for fun. And so they were passing the hat around. There was a guitarist, someone playing an old stand-up piano, and a singer, and female singer. And so they were passing the hat, and they get to us, and I'm pulling out my money, and Linda says, "Go ahead." And I went, "Okay." And the lady said, "What?" Like, "Well, I'm a huge Bruce Springsteen fan." And she's rolling her eyes because she knows I'm going to ask you, "Can you do a Springsteen song?" And she says, "Oh, Atlantic City is one of my favorite songs. We'll do it next set." And I was just thrilled because not I'm on fire, or that, which I have a belief that if you throw $5 into a tip jar and ask a singer songwriter to do Springsteen, 50% of them will do "I'm on
That's
Fire,"
what they're gonna do.
because
Yeah.
it's a simple song, it's a good song, it's and it's easy for him to do. To get Atlantic City, I was like, really? Wow, that's great. So that's good. You've mentioned a couple of times seeing him live, so I always
Yeah.
like to preface this, Trevor, with the amount of times you've seen him is not a fair barometer of how big of a fan you are. But for the record, have you counted how many times you've seen him?
Yeah, I've only been to 5 concerts.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you have a story though about, you have a special Bruce connection that is a family story. And so
Yeah.
please share that.
So yeah, got really into Bruce after high school. I kind of dove in, and for me, I started kind of going through the back catalog, and obviously, getting really into his what he was doing currently, being interested in to see what was coming next. And for me, the tour that came, the first tour that I was able to go see was when I was in college. I was at UC Davis, and it was the Rising Tour, and at Arco Arena. And my mom at the time had just been remarried, and I, her new husband, I just hadn't. She had met him while I was in my first year of college, and this was, I think, junior year. And so they'd been together a few years, and they were actually at that point, I think, just engaged. But I didn't know him very well. And when I had been around him, there was no antagonism or animosity. He's a really sweet guy, but we didn't seem to have anything in common. I mean, he was like an international human rights lawyer. He's this amazing guy. But I was a college kid, and I was
Yeah.
an English major, and there wasn't, we were having trouble sort of figuring there were a lot of awkward moments. There was a lot of kind of
Like,
sitting
yeah.
around trying to talk about the weather or something.
Yeah.
It just,
Hey, how about those Yankees or,
it's,
whatever, right? Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
that was the other thing. Like we finally both sort of found out we were into basketball a little bit, and so we could talk about sports to some degree. But
Yeah.
we just were really struggling to find touchstones and common points of interest. And I mentioned at some point that my girlfriend and I had just seen Springsteen at Arco, and his eyes just lit up. And it's something that I hadn't even thought to ever talk about. I mean, we just hadn't even really covered music. I think he
Yeah.
knew, we were from different generations.
Sure.
And so we just figured there's not going to be any music that we're going to want to talk about together. And his whole face lit up, and he was like, "Oh my God, are you a Springsteen fan?" And I said, "Yeah, I've been since I was young." And he's the guy that you might want to get on this podcast at some point because, he is a guy who has flown to numerous concerts. He will go to numerous stops on every tour. And, we spent the rest of that evening just diving into this. My mom was so shocked to walk back in the room. When she'd walked out, we'd just been kind of sitting there awkwardly as we
Right.
always were. And when she came back in, we were just, firing back and forth all these different, our favorite songs and lyrics and, memories that reminded, all of these moments that we'd had of kind of epiphany with, oh, the first time I heard this song or the first
Yeah.
time this really hit me. And she could not believe the change. And ever since then, so we then ended up going to all the rest of the concerts that I've been to have been with him. And we went to, I think we saw I think the next available was the Seeger tour, the Seeger sessions.
Yeah.
And then after that was probably Magic, and then Working on a Dream. And so, that has been since then, we have been as close as can be. I think once you find someone that is also a Bruce fan, and
Sure.
you have that in common, and there's something, you automatically know that there's something inside you that is compatible.
Yes.
If you have this passion for this same thing that I do,
Yeah.
in the same way that I do, there's got to be something there. And we found that, and that opened, doors to a ton of different commonalities that we weren't aware that we had. And we still can just, anytime I'm there, he's going to, he sends me all kinds of articles about Bruce, and we compare notes, and, we'll send each other old videos from different, performances that we hadn't seen before, or bootleg stuff. And that it has created a bond that I never really thought I would have with my stepdad, or at least didn't know how to create.
I absolutely love the story because, you know, the majority of people who join me on the podcast will say something along the lines, "Oh, I'm just happy to talk Bruce," because normally my family is tired of me talking Bruce to them, right?
Yes.
Yeah, I'm just thrilled you're giving me the opportunity, Jesse. And go ahead.
Oh no, that's funny because I mean that was part of what my mom said too. When she came in, she was like, "Oh, thank God you can go to the concerts together," because he had dragged her, I guess, or at least was
Yeah.
trying to drag her to a bunch of concerts. And she is a Springsteen. She's a cat. She is
Yeah.
that casual Springsteen fan
Right.
who enjoyed Born in the USA, but didn't go
Right.
from there. Didn't For her, it didn't open any doors. And
Yeah.
So she just likes those songs, but she would be that person who would go to the concert and not get what she wanted out of it because she wouldn't know
Yeah,
90% of what he played. And so she was relieved and thrilled that we could bond on this, and it kind of got her off the hook too.
that's kind of funny. What I find kind of interesting is um, she hadn't she didn't do any matchmaking, right? Like, hey, Trevor, you like Bruce Springsteen. Your stepdad, what's his first name?
His name is Steve.
So, okay, Steve likes Bruce Springsteen. Let's, hey, you guys should talk. That's hilarious. And yes, please reach out to Steve and say, hey, you got to join. And so I'd love to hear his side of the story, and to do that. That's wonderful. Um, I Any stories from concerts you want to share?
I was trying to think if there's anything. For me, they've all been. It's interesting. I mean, they all kind of run together for me.
Sure.
It's just one big celebration, and it is the Church of Bruce, and that is something that has struck me so much is the almost it does feel like a form of worship to go to this because I'm not religious in any way, and so I've been to church just as kind of a like tourist,
Yeah.
but I've never connected with it. I don't understand the idea of
Right.
standing in this sort of huge space with other people and feeling that same thing and feeling this kind of divine presence and being
Yeah.
moved together. And to me, it has been my mom would call it the Church of Bruce, and that's where we would kind of go to sort of let everything out. It's funny because Steve is he's a lawyer, he's a professor. He's been a law professor at UC Berkeley at the law school there, and and also traveled all over the world doing international human rights stuff. But he's, as most lawyers are, he's very kind of buttoned down. He's a
Sure.
guy who he doesn't wear his heart on his sleeve. He's not going to rock shows all the time.
Right.
But being able to see him, I think that was the two things that really have struck me from Bruce concerts is seeing how the crowd reacts and how I react to it, how it sort of moves me in a way that to me feels very religious and very, it feels like we become all this one unit. We're all
Yes.
there for the same thing. It's this very, very emotional and intense experience. And then also seeing someone like Steve, because I'd been to heavy metal concerts, I'd been in like mosh pits, I'd seen people go pretty crazy for music before, but I'd never seen someone like Steve be able to just let loose. It was like going to these concerts uh, really allowed him to sort of, he jumps up and down. He doesn't sit down throughout the entire concert. Neither of us are in our seat at all. He is so excited. He yells, he hollers, he puts his hands up in the air like it's a revival, like it's
Yes.
like we're snake handlers or something.
Yeah.
It's so intense, and it's cathartic. We get
Hmm.
to leave that concert together with this sense of, again, just this bonding that really would never have come about any other way, and seeing each other in a very vulnerable state too, where you do just let your guard down, and you do just kind of, all of the sort of all of the everyday kind of uh, politeness, all of that goes out the window, and you're
Hmm.
just jumping up and down and acting like a fool.
Yeah.
And that's not something that we would have ever seen. Either of us would have ever seen the other person do in
Right.
any context.
Hey, a couple things remind me of one. I had a guest, uh, Richard Hunter. He does a wrestling podcast, and he used to live here in Dallas and was on the sports station. And um, he's a huge Springsteen fan, and he talked about that. He's an atheist,
Mhm.
and he says, and the only church I attend is the Church of Springsteen.
Yeah.
He says, and um, there's no collection plates, there's no responsibilities. He said every couple of years, um, the church comes to my town,
Yeah.
and I'm my donation, to the pulpit is a ticket, and I go and I feel revitalized and baptized. And my as I talked about my buddy Sam, who was telling the Tom Petty story, he grew up Jewish.
Hmm.
He said that's a joke he stole, but he
Yeah.
grew up Jewish, and he said the Seeger session was as close to a religious experience he'd ever had.
Yeah.
Just
I could
hearing
see
that
that.
lot, just seeing
Hmm.
that, and he was involved. So yeah, that's great.
Yeah, and just also being able to go numerous times because I wish I could have gone more, and I hope there are more opportunities to go.
Yes.
But like being able to anticipate, knowing the things that happen during the show, and you're all on the same page, knowing that during Badlands, when the lights are going to come up,
Yes.
and just it becomes this very communal experience. And
Absolutely.
and that is something that I've treasured because again, I don't know if I'd say atheist, I'm definitely agnostic. I'm definitely like confused about religion,
Yeah.
but that gives me a little taste of it, and
Yeah.
I'm really grateful for that.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. I mean, when we're all singing along to Thunder Road, or like, when everyone sings the first verse of Hungry Heart,
Yeah.
or, in Badlands, when we're all, doing that. Yeah, there is that togetherness, and it's absolutely wonderful. Um, so I'm going to switch gears just for a minute. Talk to me about your podcast.
Oh, my podcast. So I started doing comedy about 10 years ago, doing stand up comedy. And that went pretty well. I've been super lucky and gotten to kind of open for some of my idols, and it's been really fun. It's not something that I think I'm ever gonna, I'm probably not gonna be the next huge Netflix star, but I have been able to do a lot. And that turned into right before COVID. And we were me and a friend another comedian friend sort of decided, hey, we should, in order to kind of publicize more of our shows and things, we should start a podcast. Everyone else is starting a podcast. Why
Sure.
not? And at first it kind of it didn't end up working out that well with the other guy. He's a great guy, but our schedules didn't work that well,
Yeah.
and just logistically it wasn't going to happen.
Hmm.
And so I kind of let that go. And right before COVID hit, a few months before, a best friend, one of my best friends, the guy who was the singer in many of my bands,
Yeah.
um, he ended up having some free time, and we said, hey, why don't we do this together? And he's a really funny guy too, although he hasn't done comedy professionally. And we started this podcast called Midnight Facts for Insomniacs, and it's
Great name, by the way.
yeah, thank you. I've always had trouble sleeping, but beyond that, I've also always been really interested in sort of trivia and just deep diving on different subjects. I used to just read the Encarta Encyclopedia, which was this Microsoft thing, and they had this timeline, and you could just go through and just read about every event, and that would lead to another event, and it was like Wikipedia before Wikipedia. And now I'll go down Wikipedia rabbit holes, and
Hmm.
I love to research, and so he's the opposite of that. He's just super, not really into current events or history. And so we had the idea of kind of me just teaching him about things that we found interesting, and we would pick different subjects, and it really, and I did not know what to expect with it, but we just clicked immediately, and the chemistry is really amazing, and it just took off. And so we have been incredibly blessed to kind of come out right when we did, right before COVID. It just automatically kind of, you know, it became an outlet for us, and also it seemed to speak to a lot of people.
Hmm.
And so now we have a Discord channel or server where people go. There's always a couple hundred fans in there. They're always talking about, the different episodes, and then they actually suggest and vote on all of the subjects for each show. So each show that we do is chosen by the fans at this point. So it's really fun. I get to learn things that I never would have thought about. And some things I really wanted to know a lot about. We just did an episode on North Korea. We did an episode on the Bay of Pigs. We've done episodes on artificial intelligence, and just anything that the fans think is interesting, they'll throw it up in a poll and they vote on it. And then I go ahead and research it and I teach it to Duncan. And it's been super fun. It's a really good time.
That sounds very interesting. A very different kind of podcast too.
Yeah, there are a couple other shows that are similar that I wasn't even aware of when we started. But there is How Stuff Works. We're kind of like a How Stuff Works with a comedic side to it, and we sort of go a little bit deeper than I think those guys do. And it can be really fun. I think it's something that if you are into kind of jumping into different topics, the one thing that I think is strange about our podcast is unlike something like this where you have a real narrow focus. We're kind of all over the place,
Yeah.
but each actual episode is very laser focused on that specific topic, and I think we go pretty in depth on it. And I'm very proud of my research skills because I've been doing that for a long time. So yeah, I think it turned out great.
One of my favorite writers still is Isaac Asimov,
Oh
the
yeah.
science fiction writer. And, he talked about in his autobiography that, you know, one of his great joys was being hot, being his publishers, we want you to write this book, and he has to go do the research to go write the book, so that he could know, because you have to learn the subject before you can write about the subject. So I could see how that would be fun for you and enjoying. I tend to, this one, I try to explain to people when I'm looking for guests. I go, you don't, majority of my guests are Springsteen fans, but I do have a fair amount of, other musicians, other podcasters, and other people join me. I said, if you're passionate about another band, come on and share that with me, because I love to hear about other, people who are passionate. And we had a great guy on, David Fodor, who loves the Bee Gees. And he and I shared the statement that, um, I said, how often do you say, when someone says, I can't stand the Bee Gees, do you go, have you listened to anything besides Saturday Night Fever?
Right.
Because I don't like Bruce Springsteen. Well, have you listened to anything besides Born in the USA?
Right.
Right. So yeah. So that sounds like a lot of fun.
It is, and it's interesting that you would mention that because I really enjoy the aspect of not choosing the topics because it's pushed me in directions that I wouldn't go. Sometimes they'll choose a topic and I roll my eyes. I'm just like, we did one on crazy, wild, strange fashion fads throughout the ages. And I was not super thrilled about looking into that. It just didn't seem very exciting to
Yeah.
me. But then going into it and, paper clothing and all of the cod pieces and things that I just hadn't really even thought about and why they took off and why they became what they were, and why they went away. It was really one of my favorite recent episodes to look into. So it is, you don't know until you kind of look into it if it's maybe there's something there. So that's been a lot of fun because I think if I were just left to my own devices, I would just look into things that I already know a lot about
Yeah.
and probably wouldn't be pushed out of my comfort zone as much. Are you, out of curiosity, are you excited about the Foundation
I am. I'm looking forward to it a
Apple
lot. I,
TV?
I, I
Yeah,
am. I'm hoping for good things.
me too.
Um, the, you know, um, you remind me a little bit of the John Oliver HBO show now, right?
Ah,
That,
yeah.
because every episode they go deep into a subject.
Ah, I love
And
Last Week Tonight. Yeah, it's
yeah,
great.
exactly. And the idea of, my wife and I'll talk about, I had no idea that I was interested in why, making people pay bail is a
Hmm.
bad idea, and that
Yeah,
actually you could just, the whole all you'd have to do is, hey, here's a court date, show up. And the statistics show most people do show up, and you don't have to, and bail ends up being this, financial thing for that cost people. And it's, we always end up going, 99% of the time, wow, I didn't know I wanted to know about that subject, but I'm
yeah.
really glad he covered it.
Yeah, he's great at that. That's really interesting that you point that out because that's
Yeah,
something I hadn't thought of. But yeah, I mean, I think when you get to look into something, you start to understand what other people are maybe excited
yeah,
about. And like you said with Bruce, same thing. My mom, for instance, has found since that
yeah,
day, has found certain songs that really speak to her that are,
right,
she just loves. They're, on for their wedding. I think it was "If I Should Fall Behind." I think
right.
was the song that they play, and that is one of my mom's favorite all-time songs now, and that's not
Yeah,
something she would have ever heard without
no,
Steve.
yeah,
And and she's still not. There are a lot of songs that she just doesn't connect to the way that he and I do.
yeah,
But she will. If you get into something that someone is into, you'll start to understand. There's got to be something there.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Thoughts on Western Stars, Letter to You?
I like it. It's been tough for me to. I did watch I think it was the HBO where they did like the.
Yeah,
Yeah. Um, and that was cool because I like being able to see a little bit of sort of how the sausage gets made too.
right.
I even was surprised that he was using like an SM7B to record some of the songs, which I was
Hmm.
like, oh, okay, he's using that microphone. Um, and that it was cool to see. And there are some songs that I've enjoyed so far. I would say, it's definitely not up for me personally. It's just not up there with some of my favorite albums. I don't
Okay,
think it's ever going to be in the pantheon for me. But there are things I've really enjoyed about it.
okay,
What about for
very.
you? How are you feeling about it?
So, Letter to You, I really liked Western Stars, but then I grew up in a household that, um, to all apologies to the Blues Brothers, we listened to both kinds of music, country and Western. Where Johnny Cash, Glenn Campbell, Merle Haggard, Hank Williams, um, were played often. And so Western Stars, reminded me of that Glenn Campbell, that feel. And then Letter to You, just, I said multiple times that if we got a new president in November and a new Springsteen album in, the fall, maybe 2020 will not be the worst year ever. And so the album really spoke to me. And then and you talked about like the little documentary that's black and white that shows
Mhm.
them making it, is just fascinating to. There's a scene where little Steven is giving him advice on it, and you go,
Yeah.
"Oh my God, that's Silvio! It's Silvio talking to Tony." And and he has said that multiple times in interviews that the reason he was comfortable playing Sil was he had played that role in real life with Bruce. So yeah, it meant a lot. I really liked it. Um, I think I think it's amazing at 70 that there's still speed on the fastball, if to use the sports metaphor, right? He's still hitting the, mid-range jumper, to use the basketball analogy. That they may not be the greatest albums ever, but they are certainly respectable and good. And I know on some fans love them.
Yeah, Letter to You, the two songs that were sort of Christian themed sounding
Yeah.
in the names, and I'm trying to remember, but I think one was,
Power Prayer.
yes, and then
And If I
If
Was
I
the
Was the
Priest.
Priest.
Yes.
Those two songs, for some reason, I don't know why, but those two were the two that really stood out to me and really
Yeah.
connected with me.
Yeah.
Um, and I thought, the power in his voice too was really, like you said, he's not a spring chicken anymore.
No.
But feeling that the kind of the power in those songs, and just almost the kind of the rumble of his voice. Now there's
Yeah.
a little more, even there's some seasoning there
Yes,
too that
there is.
wasn't there in the past. And that was those two songs, those really connected with me, and I was able to kind of feel partly a little bit of the old Bruce, and then or the previous Bruce, and then also appreciate the current Bruce.
Yeah.
Like he's bringing something to this that he wouldn't have been able to say or wouldn't have been able to convey back then.
Yeah. Land of Hope and Dreams is one of my favorite songs.
It's always been
Uh,
one of my favorites.
yeah, and I I've told this story multiple times that one of my best friends died, and I said it at his funeral. When my father died, I quoted Land of Hope and Dreams at my father's funeral. And I've always thought that one day my son would quote it at mine. But I'll see you in my dreams is close to, you know,
Yeah.
that is in the discussion for that. It is amazing. Um, so I I love the idea. Back to the podcast just for a moment, that you've got enough fan base that they're helping you steer the ship. I think that is really interesting.
Yeah, it's been strange to have the Discord in particular. It was started by a fan, and I hadn't wanted to do it, partly because I just didn't know anything about Discord.
Yeah.
And uh, it as soon as she started it, and she kind of, I just watched it take off. And what's been really interesting is that I thought that the way that we would keep it going and keep it growing was that Duncan and I, the other co-host, would have to be in there a lot, and kind of this would be a chance for them to talk to us. I
Right.
thought that would be very cool for them. And it turns out that they like that. That's nice. But mostly they want to talk about us without us there. Like
Hmm. Yeah.
it's become more of a this is a place for them to talk about the show. And when we come in there, it's kind of like a little pop in, and they're like, oh, it's that's
Hmm.
exciting for them. But it's funny because I really thought, oh, this is I didn't know what it was. I didn't know that it was just mostly a way for them. It's a community for fans to connect. It's not a community for us to,
Yeah.
connect with our fans necessarily. And that's been really cool to just watch this thing. It's almost like watching an ant farm or something. You're
Yeah.
just watching the reaction to each episode that we put out, and they'll,
Hmm.
they have a channel for current episode, and they'll just talk about it. There's a channel for episode quotes where they'll write their favorite quotes from us on there. And I get to go in and just kind of, it's very voyeuristic. I get to go in there and just
Sure.
watch and see what's happening. And that's been really fascinating to me.
How often do you put out new episodes?
We're weekly, so we do every week.
So you have to, they give you a topic, and within a week, well, do you have some buffer? Like,
Yeah. So
okay,
we're usually a couple weeks in advance with the topic. So
okay,
I'm always researching, and we're in the process of editing. The recording doesn't take very long, and the editing doesn't take too long, but the research is the bulk of it. And so I'm
yeah,
all literally on a daily basis, I'm diving into research, and it has been hard since the end of quarantine. I mean, this was something that we started right before quarantine, and in the beginning, we did really pretty short episodes in the beginning, and then COVID, during quarantine, I had a lot of time. This was not hard to do.
sure,
I
yeah,
I was enjoying it. It was a great, it was a great thing to sink energy
yeah,
into. It was a great distraction from what was going on in the world. And then going back to work full time, and I haven't even gone back to comedy yet, and I don't know
mhm,
if I'm going to, or if I'm going to be able to. And at
yeah,
this point, it is a lot. It is hard. It's hard, but it's worth it, because I think that if it hadn't grown to where it is now, I wouldn't, because it's so much work, I don't think I'd keep going. But
yeah,
now, when you're doing a lot of downloads, and you have a lot of people that are kind of relying on it, I just feel partly obligated, but also that gives me enough momentum and sort of motivation to do it. So, but
yeah,
it is hard, and honestly, I don't know if I'm going to be able to go back to comedy anytime soon and maintain the podcast. If I start doing comedy again, I will have to cut the podcast down to once every 2 weeks
yeah,
for
sure,
sure.
that
I
makes
won't be able to
sense.
do it weekly.
Yeah. Hmm.
Yeah.
Um, do you miss comedy?
I it's funny, I missed it so much in the beginning. And there are aspects of it that I really, really miss. But I, a big part of it, and what I missed, was the certain clubs, and the certain, like, we have this club called Rooster T. Feathers, which is kind of where I started. And I have gotten to work with amazing comedians there, some of my favorites. And I don't think it's going to reopen. And
Yeah,
DNA's Comedy Lab in Santa Cruz shut down. The Punchline is reopened, but is looking like it's shaky. They're not gonna go out of business, but I don't know how long they're gonna keep their doors open. They may shut down for a while again. So it just all feels very shaky right now, and I'm seeing there a lot of comedians are struggling. And so I did one show. I did one show in the last year at a place called Brookdale Lodge, and it was great. It was fun. I enjoyed it. I felt weird because I was doing some material that, I had written during COVID, so it kind of felt a little out of date because I'm like, it's like isn't quarantine weird? But we're all kind of out of quarantine now, and
Hmm.
but we're sort of going back in, and it just felt weird. And so I did a lot of old stuff too, and then that kind of felt weird. So I really need to just write a bunch of new stuff and see if I can kind of recapture the magic. I had a great time, but it also was weird. It was everyone was socially distant, so all the tables were set far apart, which is weird for comedy. You want everyone close together so that the laughs are just contagious and they all
Exactly.
feel, it just felt very strange. And so, if I go back to comedy, it's going to be once I think once we're back to normal, once we're back to something like normal.
Do you think the podcast helps to scratch that writing
Oh
and
yeah.
being clever bone, our itch?
I don't know what I would have done without the podcast. I mean, just for my own sanity during quarantine, and then now, yeah, I would be out there trying to do comedy right now,
Yeah.
if not for the podcast, and probably being pretty frustrated about it at this point.
Yeah. I had not thought about it, but last September was the fifth anniversary of the podcast. I've been doing this 5 years. This
Ah,
September will be
congratulations!
six.
Wow.
Thanks. And you know, um, Ken Rosen did an interview. He interviewed me, and he did an article for Backstreets about the podcast, and he talked about that he, because of the pandemic, he was missing connections, and that my podcast kind of helped to do that. And I do think that is part of why I keep doing this, and I end up doing 2 new shows a week, is I like that connection. I like that being able to talk to someone, and not just about Bruce, but about comedy and your other podcast, and those, hearing those experiences just mean a lot to me. So yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Um, so future plans. It sounds like for now you're going to keep going with the podcast, and you're debating on the comedy, huh?
Yep, that's right. That's where I am. I think at some point I will definitely go back to doing some live comedy. I'm not going to completely quit. I don't know if I'll go back to ever doing the pace that I was doing. I was doing a lot of shows. I was doing shows every weekend. Um, and I don't think that that would be sustainable. I don't want to give up the podcast, and I feel like at this point I'm going to try to fit in comedy and make it sort of an addition to what I'm already enjoying doing,
Right.
as opposed to an additional stress and
Okay.
or another commitment that I can't fully put the effort into that it
Yeah.
needs. And that's the thing with comedy, is you kind of do have to do it every week if you're serious about it and you're trying to make money at it, which I was making some decent money at it. Not, I wasn't going to be rich, but you have to do it every week, and you really have to stay up, and you have to know, you have to be going to shows too, or at least going to do enough shows that you're around comics and you have to know what they're saying. Because honestly, right now, if I went and tried to do a show, some of the stuff that I would have been writing lately is probably really sounds hacky because everyone's doing it.
Yeah.
And I would be talking about the same mask stuff, and like, how we're all, oh, now we're all judging people based on how we have pretty eyes, like people with pretty
Yeah.
eyes, or this is your time to shine or something.
Hmm.
And I know that's being done because it's just the obvious stuff. And so to be good at comedy and to really get into it, you have to be out there all the time so that you know what is already being covered, and you kind of, you have to stay in the zeitgeist of it.
Yeah.
And I'm kind of outside it right now. And so I
Sure.
feel like I would be, I'd be coming in and people would be rolling their eyes like, really, dude, that's what you're going to do now, is the stuff that everyone's been talking about for the last 5 months.
Yeah.
So I would need to dive fully back in. And I don't have, without quitting the podcast, I don't have the time to do that. So I kind of
Yeah.
have to make that decision.
Yeah, that makes sense. Well, good. Well, I'm certainly going to check out the podcast, and this sounds very informative yet funny, right? So, which is, I know, the sweet spot you're trying to go to.
Oh,
Um,
by the way, I should say, I
yeah.
didn't even think about this, but with comedy, just so you know, I go by my middle name. So my name is Trevor Shane Rogers. And so if you're wondering why it's not Trevor Rogers on Midnight Facts for Insomniacs, that it's Shane Rogers is what I've always
Ah,
gone by.
okay.
And same with comedy, if you want to see clips or anything,
Okay.
shanerogers.net has
Okay.
has clips of me.
All right, very good. Let me make a note of that. Um, all right, let's go back to Bruce just a little bit. Is there favorite songs, albums you want to share about?
Oh boy. Um, you know what I would love? I think one of the questions that you mentioned was like what I haven't seen live and would love
Yes.
to see.
Yeah, so you can
Um,
kind of all mix that together. That's,
yeah. And one thing that have you seen? So I was a big fan of actually Ghost of Tom Joad. So when that
okay.
came out, that was kind of the next album that came out after I kind of got back into Bruce, and obviously it was a very kind of a departure. But my girlfriend bought it for me, and I just listened to it on repeat, and I was a huge fan. I mean, it even though it was so different, um, just that it's so intimate. There's something very intimate about it. And Youngstown was a song that I had really loved on Ghost of Tom Joad, and then I've seen now video of him doing it live with this, the kind of giving it the E Street Band
Yeah.
makeover, and Niles Lofgren doing this incredible solo. Like it,
Right.
have you seen the video of, or have you seen it live of
Yes.
with him doing it?
I think I've seen it live. I'll have to think, but yes, I have to go to my Bruce base and look it up, but yes, I believe so. I know I've seen the video.
It's
Yeah, it is great.
and I play guitar. I've played for years, and
Yeah.
Niles do it using the thumb pick and all of the finger tapping, and then just the raw emotion of it. I mean, that is I've watched that video so many times, and
Mhm.
shown it to other guitarist friends of mine. They're all blown away by it. It is just amazing, and I haven't had a chance to see that live, and that is something that every time I go, I'm like, oh God, please play Youngstown. Um, but that's one of my favorites, and something that again also harkens back to what we were talking about with Bruce being able to sort of update and or reconfigure
Mhm.
or change the arrangement of a song to make it a completely, I mean, that was such a sedate song initially and becomes one of the like heaviest, most rocking kind of driving songs.
Mhm.
And so that's just one of my favorites and something that always kind of blew me away. Um yeah.
Trevor, what's interesting is my first show was the Rising too. I That was the first show I went to. And I I I had not learned the Rising. I'd heard it maybe once or twice, the album. So he's doing all these songs that I don't really recognize. I don't know. I was a casual fan at most. And um so when Devils and Dust came out, I did exactly what you did with Ghost of Tom Joad. I'm playing Devils of Dust just on nonstop in my car. It's in the CD player and it's just playing over and over and over again. And so when he toured with Devils and Dust, I was like, I'm ready. I have done my homework. I have done my research. I am ready to do this. So Devils and Dust has a special place in my heart for that reason, because it was the first show and the first CD that I had become obsessed. I had become this Springsteen fanatic, and to enjoy that experience. So I totally get how Ghost of Tom Joad just could speak to you that way.
And you mentioned The Rising, and that that's funny because I had been listening to The Rising kind of on repeat before I went to
Yeah.
the show, and this was obviously in the wake of 9/11, and um, it was sort of a way for collectively a lot of Bruce brand fans, I
Yeah.
guess, at least, to sort of, it was like it was like therapy for us to listen to
Yeah,
that album.
absolutely.
And
Yeah.
that was that song, playing The Rising when I saw him live. And I've been to a lot of concerts, including some I didn't even care about, like the Grateful Dead, but a lot
Yeah.
of heavy metal and a lot of great shows that I had seen as well. I've been really lucky to see a lot of great artists, but uh, the Rising, the song, playing that was the first time I'd ever cried in a concert, and it was very, it wasn't a sad, it wasn't sitting down and bawling. It was like so ecstatic and just emotional that like I had tears streaming down my face. And every time he plays The Rising, and I think he's played it at every show that I've been to, other than Seeger sessions, um, I have cried at that song, and it's just something that just will always connect with me, and it will always be a very emotional. Even the memory of it gets me kind of choked up.
So um it is interesting that I have gone to um about 15 shows, And The Rising is the only show, this only song that he has played every time I've attended.
Yeah.
And part of that is because my first show was The Rising, and I was lucky enough to get to go to Broadway, when he played it there. And so yeah, I love that song. So I'm right there with you.
Yeah.
All right. Before we get to the Mary question, I always like to give this, what should I have asked you that I haven't, Trevor?
Oh boy. I don't know. I think, honestly, this is great. You're very thorough. You do a great job on this podcast.
Well, thank you.
And yeah, no, I don't think there's anything I can think of that you've left
Okay.
out. This
Okay.
has been all this is everything I hoped it would be.
Oh, well, good. I'm very glad, and good. All right. So if you're a fan of Midnight Facts for Insomniacs, and you're like, why does he keep calling him Trevor? His name's Shane. And you're listening to this podcast, you're probably going, what the hell is the Mary question? I end every podcast with this question. So Jay Armstrong is a recently retired honors English teacher from the Philadelphia area. And when he was teaching, he would have his seniors in high school spend 2 days breaking apart Thunder Road as a poem. They would go through all the imagery that Bruce does. They study the lyrics. They talk about the themes. They compare it to Robert Frost and other poets. And at the end of the 2 days, he asked the question, does Mary get in the car at the end of Thunder Road? Trevor, that's your question.
That's a great question. I'd be interested to hear what the kind of consensus has been generally. If you've kept track and kept, a tally of like what most people think. What's funny is I asked my fiance this because she's a casual Bruce fan, but she certainly
Okay.
knows Thunder Road. And she said, "Well, yeah, she gets in at the end." And I said, "Well, you don't know that. I mean, that's it ends before you find out." And she said, "No, no, no. It says and Mary climbed in." And I said, "No, that's not what the lyric is." She always thought that at the end it said and Mary climbed in,
Yeah,
so that she was like, "Oh yeah, of course she got in." And I thought that was pretty funny to
that
me
is greatness.
um, is I was like, no, that's not actually the lyric. Uh, and I don't know. I feel he says at a point in the song, don't turn me away again. So it seems like she's she has a history here
Yes.
of not getting in the car. So I don't know. I want to believe that she did. I want to believe that they rode off and that they did win. And but I don't know what is the current tally? Do you have any idea?
So I have not, it's a good idea. I should have been doing this all along. Um, Based on just my gut feeling, 60-40. 60% say yes, she gets in the
That she
car,
got in.
40% say no. A couple of my favorite answers. Um, Someone said that absolutely she gets in the car. Often people say yes, she gets in the car because Mary got pregnant, for the river.
Yeah,
That's the same one.
he's used the same name, but he's
Yeah.
also used Barry in a few
Yeah.
other songs as well.
Uh, Someone said if you think about Racing in the Street, there's a lyric where she sits on her father's porch or daddy's porch. That's the same porch that she dances across. I'm like,
Ah,
oh, I'd never thought of that.
huh.
Um, Someone said that Moonlight Motel is the sequel to Thunder Road, that they get in the car, they drive all the way to California, and that he's now mourning Mary's death.
Ooh,
So they spent their life together. So listen to Moonlight Motel and think of that, and that give you a different perspective.
interesting.
Um, the One of my favorites is a guy said, well, it depends. I've heard it several people like, no, she doesn't get in because he isn't worthy of her, but he continues later. Other people say, yes, she gets in the car, but the first time he stops at the gas station to get gas and cigarettes, she gets out.
She bails.
Yes, she bails. Like, man, what was I thinking? So one of my favorites is he says when it's a E Street band She absolutely gets in the car because it ends triumphantly with the Clarence's solo and all this stuff. When he does it solo, she doesn't get in the car because he ends it very subdued and with
Huh.
the humming. So,
And I've always actually preferred the kind of stripped down version
yes,
of Thunder Road personally.
yeah, I do too. Yeah. And so, absolutely great answer. Well done, sir. I appreciate that. I actually, a year and a half ago, I did an episode where, um, I took about 30 people's answers and all pitched them together, and kind of a greatest hits of the Mary.
What
And
number
then
episode is that?
I will have to look it up, and I'll email you and let you know. And then I'll actually send you a link to the episode. And then Jay, who actually gave me the question, I'd never thought of this. Like,
Hmm.
Jay Armstrong is joining me just same way you are. He's just telling the story. And all of a sudden, he says, yeah, I do this with my class. And I'm like, and I'm kind of like your fiance. Well, yeah, she gets in because the lyrics is, we're driving out of here to win. So they're
Yeah.
together. And he's like, well, if you look at this lyric sheet, it doesn't say we. I'm like, what? No, what? I've never thought about this. So anyway, I sent him the file of all the answers, and then we spent about an hour and a half discussing them. And so I will send you both links to the
Yeah. Oh,
episodes
I
that
definitely want to
because
listen to that.
it was a lot of fun. Female listeners tend to go, yes, more. She gets in the car.
That's
Uh,
interesting.
yeah. Some of the guys tend to not, and like they'll say, I I wish she was, but I just don't think she's going to. And then
Yeah.
my absolute favorite of the cynical is I had a lady who um, Bex, who is not a Springsteen fan. She she's another podcaster. She joined me. She had never heard the song, and she pulled up the lyrics and she wrote, "Oh my God, he's gonna kill her if he
Yeah.
gets in the car."
Well, I was gonna say, I mean, if all you're listening to is the lyrics and you're not kind of connected with the song and the melody
Yeah,
itself, and it is a little bit creepy. Like, is
yeah,
this guy like trying to convince this girl to get
yes,
in the car, and
yeah,
he's very insistent, and
yes, exactly.
and
So
it
she's
seems like she has run away before.
right.
She's like,
Yes,
don't run away from me. Get in the car.
yeah.
It's a little bit abducty.
Yes, absolutely. All right. Trevor, this has been a blast. Thank you so much. If someone wants to reach you, what's the best way?
Yeah. So just the podcast we have an Instagram for Midnight Facts for Insomniacs, and that's usually how people get in touch with me. Midnight Facts for Insomniacs at Gmail, and then obviously just through the podcast itself. There are links on all the podcasts. You just scroll down. There's a link to our Discord, a link to our Instagram, and a link to contact us as well. Midnight Facts for Insomniacs.
Are you on Twitter?
I am not. I
Okay.
got off Twitter recently. It was just I
I get it. I understand. Yep. No,
just
I
I
totally
had
get it.
enough. I
Yes,
had enough Twitter.
absolutely. Good. Well, continued success, sir. Um, if you have anything you want to promote going forward, reach out to me and go, hey, Jesse, I'm gonna be I'm gonna have a comedy MP3 out. I'd like to promote it, or just to do that. I absolutely adored visiting with you, and I'm so glad you spent some time with me. Continued success, sir. I am going to check out the podcast. I think that sounds fun, and I'll also check out the Instagram and Discord. That sounds like a blast.
Well, thank you so much, Jesse. This has been super fun. It was great to be able to finally talk to someone about Bruce. It's been a while. I feel like we've all been locked in our little cells here, and this has been a great way for me to get this all out.
Well, good. And yes, please reach out to your stepdad and go, hey, you got to do this podcast because
I
that
will
would
for
be a
sure.
blast. That sounds
You would
great.
love him, yeah.
Yeah. Listeners, you stay safe. Go get vaccinated. Remember to wear your mask, wash your hands, remember social distance. The only way we're going to get through this is if we're good to each other. I appreciate you. Thank you for listening. Thank you, Trevor. And we will talk to you soon. Goodbye. Doing a podcast at times can be a one-way conversation, and I hate that. So please let me know what you like and don't like about the work I'm doing. You can reach the podcast via email at setlistingbruce@gmail.com. The show is on Twitter at setlistingbruce, and my personal Twitter is at jessejacksondfw. We have a website, www.setlistingbruce.com. From there, you can find links to other Springsteen podcasts as well as other music themed podcasts. We have a page devoted to our own SLB All Star Band. These are guests who have been on the podcast more than 3 times. There is a link to our store where you can purchase Set Listing Bruce shirts as well as a Mary Question t shirt. There is a link to our Patreon page where you can sign up to help support the podcast financially. We have different levels and different rewards based on your support. If you don't have any extra cash, and right now, who does? You can support the podcast by subscribing via your favorite podcast player and leaving us a review. The more reviews we have, the easier it is for people to find us. And please tell a friend about the podcast, especially if they love Bruce or music, because it will make a difference.
You just heard the fun talking, hard rocking, music loving, album ranking, fan thinking, joy spreading, lyric reading, story sharing podcast that is the one, the only Set Listing Bruce. The theme for Set Listing Bruce was written by David Rosen, used by permission.